Hello, everyone. This is an analysis of a game that was just broadcast yesterday by NHK in their TV tournament. It's a very famous tournament, and this is a second round game between Nishiyama and Fujii. So, two gigantic names in the shogi world right now, and they played each other. Now, interestingly, this is not their first time playing. They were actually in Shoreikai at the same time, not necessarily in the Sandan League, but even in lower ranks. And they actually played three times in Shoreikai, and Nishiyama actually has a winning record against Fujii in those games. So obviously those were when Fujii was, like 13, 12 maybe even years old. It was quite some time ago. And he's gotten quite strong since then. But this will be interesting to see how Nishiyama does against the best player in the world. Obviously, Nishiyama is currently doing the pro entrance exam. Now, this was broadcast yesterday, but NHK generally records their games beforehand and then just broadcasts them on a certain day. And so this game was actually played before Nishiyama played her first pro entrance exam game. So yeah, let's see how she does. And it was actually a pretty interesting game. Fujii obviously always starts off with his static rook opening, and Nishiyama played something you don't quite see her play very often, which is a bishop exchange. Now don't worry, she doesn't actually play a standard bishop exchange. She goes for what is known as direct mukaibisha. And the idea is generally when you're playing ranging rook, you'll move your rook over to like the third file or the fourth file, and then at some point in the game you'll shift back over to the second file. But in this strategy, what you do is you trade off the bishops early, and that way you can bring your rook all the way to the second file directly. So it saves you one move. So while you lose a move making the bishop exchange, you kind of gain it back so that you can go to the second file in one go. So Fujii goes ahead and castles his king. Nishiyama also starts castling her king. And here, Fujii just kind of making a boat castle, and Nishiyama is making Mino. Fujii decides that he's going to go ahead and bring his silver out to 4-6. Nishiyama does the same, bringing it out to 4-4. And then she goes ahead and pushes her fifth file pawn. And Fujii goes ahead and gets rid of that silver wall that he had, and goes ahead and moves the silver up to 7-7. And Nishiyama goes ahead and pushes her pawn to 7-4. Fujii keeps castling. I thought this was kind of an interesting move, because he's kind of going into more of like what is a traditional Yaguda formation, which you usually don't go for against Raging Rook. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Wasn't like super expected for me. And Nishiyama goes ahead and pushes pawn to 8-4, indicating she wants to go for Ginkanmuri, or Silver Crown, as her castle. Fujii goes ahead and moves his gold up, and they're really just continuing to castle here. And again, Fujii pushes his pawn to 6-6. Now, when I was watching this, I was like, okay, he's really just going to make Yagura against Mukaibisha? That's kind of strange. And the reason why it's a little bit strange is because, if you move your gold up here, and you're in this formation where the rooks are staring at each other, it's relatively likely that you're going to get a rook exchange, and Yaguda is not necessarily that strong against rook drops. So obviously Fujii had a different plan. Actually, that wasn't his plan, and we're gonna see what actually happens right now, which is his idea was to actually just continue to push the pawn to 6-5. And this was a pretty unexpected move. I think the professional commentary was being done by Suzuki Daisuke, who is one of the top ranging rook players even now. He used to be, I think, the very top ranging rook player maybe like 10 to 15 years ago. He's not quite there anymore, but he's also like very good at giving commentary. And there's always like an assistant kind of helping the conversation along, and she asked him like, hey, like, can you explain what Fujii's idea is with this move? And his response was, man, you ask some hard questions. So what he came up with, though, on the spot is actually what happened in the game. Just goes to show how good these professional players are. And basically, Nishiyama is going to go ahead and jump her knight to 7-3, and Fujii is going to go ahead and move his silver up to 6-6. And so what Suzuki Daisuke was saying is basically by pushing this pawn before the knight gets there, you can support it with the silver. And it kind of restricts the movement of the knight. Nishiyama can't push 6-4 anymore. That would then support the knight jump. And so that's kind of the idea of how Fujii decided to play this opening. And now, essentially, Fujii is going to go ahead and make a variant of a Yagura castle. And so now his goal is to not trade rooks, right? He doesn't want to trade rooks, and instead what he wants to do is to fight on essentially the king side of the board. Now in shogi you don't normally think about it in this way of like king side versus, in this case I guess it would be rook side, because it really only happens if the opponent is going for a ranging rook, and even then it's much rarer where you're fighting head on. Usually what happens is you fight on the rook side of the board, and then maybe you trade off the rooks and you drop and you see who can attack faster. But Fujii's idea in this game is, no, I'm not going to trade rooks. I'm just going to try and hold down the fort on the rook side of the board, and I want to fight head on at the on top of our kings from the king side. So Nishiyama goes ahead and retreats the rook. Fujii goes ahead and initiates an attack. But this is really just to trade pawns. Nishiyama drops the pawn and he goes ahead and retreats the silver. And Nishiyama goes ahead and develops her gold to 4-2. This is actually a pretty common structure that you're going to see. It's very, very balanced. So you can see, there's no weaknesses in her camp right now, right? Because the rook is guarding the entirety of the back rank, and then every other piece is guarding. So this is a pretty common structure you'll see, whether it's in this case with Mukai Bisho or even in static rook. So in a lot of static rook bishop exchanges, you'll see like gold here, rook here. And Fujii goes ahead and continues with his idea and his plan to initiate an attack head on by going ahead and pushing his pawn to 8-6. You just don't see this very often because you're actively weakening your king in order to try and initiate this attack. But I think from even earlier, what Fujii saw is if you look at where all of the pieces are on the right side of the board, there's rooks, there's knights, lances, and silvers, but Nishiyama has kind of this extra gold chilling out on 4-2, whereas on the king side of the board, there's knights, there's silvers, there's these golds, but Fujii has an extra gold potentially to use in a head-on attack. And so I think that's kind of what triggered, and it's also possible this is just kind of his idea for this whole opening and how this opening normally goes, because you kind of need the gold here to help defend against the bishop drops. And so his idea is, okay, I'm going to go ahead and use my this is usually in Japanese called thickness, essentially. He's just got more pieces on top of his king side, and he's going to use that to his advantage in his attack. So Nishiyama tries to do something about it by going ahead and dropping the bishop. But Fujii goes ahead and blocks it with the knight while also developing it and threatening the attack. But Nishiyama does get to make a horse. But again, the problem for Nishiyama in this position is the horse is on the wrong side of the board. So her challenge in this game essentially is, how can I win on the rook side while having enough pieces to defend my king? Or how can I shift these pieces that are kind of out of the game over to the king side of the board? Because she does essentially have a material advantage right now because she's been able to make a horse, whereas Fujii has not. So Fujii goes ahead and blocks the horse from re-entering his camp by jumping this knight. And Nishiyama goes ahead and just sacks her knight off. And Fujii goes ahead and takes it. Now obviously this is a temporary sacrifice because she gets to go ahead and recapture it here. But in this position, I think the commentary was expecting Fujii to ignore this attack because it takes 2 moves essentially to go ahead and capture that knight. And in the meantime, Fujii could start an attack on the king. So for example, pawn to 8-5, pawn takes, pawn drop on 8-4, and when the silver takes, you have this nice knight drop on 7-6. And now you're really cooking on this side of the board. Before we were saying, okay, there's silvers, knights, golds, and Fujii had a gold, but now he has a gold and a knight advantage on this side of the board. And actually, this is kind of what the engine wanted to go for. Although actually, the evaluation changed slightly when I moved a little bit too fast. Okay, so the engine wants to prep with the knight drop first because you're going to get this pawn and then it won't get taken. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But anyway, you get the idea, which is while Nishiyama needs to spend essentially these two moves to capture the knight, Fujii could have started an attack on the king side and really increased the numbers advantage on that side of the board. But interestingly, Fujii did not go for this. He decided to go ahead and get an extra pawn, essentially. Nishiyama goes ahead and recaptures with the lance. And actually, technically, he ended up getting two extra pawns, right? So he goes ahead and drops this bishop. It's forking these two pieces. And here, it was a little bit interesting. Nishiyama decides to go to 2-2 with her rook. She could have gone to 3-1 and defended the pawn. But what happens is Fujii gets to promote this bishop, and he's threatening to take the lance now. The lance is unguarded, and it would come with tempo on the rook. So I think Nishiyama didn't want to give up the lance, and in order to not give up the lance, you need to go to 2-2, because now the bishop can't promote to 2-3. Instead, it gets a pawn and promotes to 3-4 instead. And now, because of that knight trade, Nishiyama gets to go ahead and re-enter her opponent's camp with the horse. Again, trying to get more pieces over to the king side of the board and deal with Fujii's advantage there. And Fujii also retreats his horse, getting it back towards the king side of the board. So interestingly, now, you can see this pawn is very far away, and it's just not going to make it, essentially, in time. And so this game turns into more of a head-on attack game, which is what Fujii wanted from the beginning. So it's going to become a bit challenging for Nishiyama to try and activate all of her pieces. But interestingly enough, one of her ideas is to go gold to 5-3. So one of the problems was the gold on 4-2 is kind of out of the game, and she decides to get it into the game by going gold to 5-3. Now, you could also have thought of going gold to 5-2. You don't have to worry about bishop drops anymore because the bishops are both on the board. The problem, I think both 5-2 and 5-3 were okay. I think what you don't quite like about 5-2 is, at least for a second, your golds are in a bit of an awkward position. It's vulnerable to a potential silver drop, and also in some variations, maybe some sort of knight drop on 6-4. And also, Nishiyama has a bit of an idea for her gold on 5-3. So Fujii here drops a pawn on 7-6. This looks like kind of a funky move. What it's doing is preventing knight drop on 7-5, which is a gigantic threat, hitting this gold, and also lining up a potential drop on 8-7. And Nishiyama goes ahead and pushes her pawn to 5-5, initiating a silver exchange. And then she goes ahead and redrops her pawn on 5-4. Fujii retreats the silver. And here is Nishiyama's idea of how to activate her gold. She's not going to use it to defend. She's going to bring it to 4-4, and she's going to use it to attack. So here, pawn to 5-5 is a big threat. You would have to go something like horse here, but then there's a knight drop coming, forking these pieces, and the horse would end up getting captured. You can't retreat here because the bishop covers the square. Fujii goes ahead and tries to deal with the horse threat, trying to get it out of his camp. Nishiyama decides she's going to go ahead and retreat the horse, and now she's got all three of these pieces coordinating on the 5-5 square, and she's about to capture Fujii's horse. So Fujii needs to get going. He decides, okay, I'm going to go ahead and start my attack. Nishiyama just ignores it and saying, what are you going to do with your horse? Fujii decides to run. You can't just give the horse up. And actually, in this position, Nishiyama's done a very good job of taking all of the weaknesses that she had and kind of solving those problems. The gold on 4-2 was inactive. She brought it up to 4-4, and she's challenging the center of the board. Her horse was on the wrong side of the board. Now it's doing a great job attacking Fujii's horse. And so here, actually, the engine prefers Nishiyama's position. The only problem for Nishiyama is there's only one move to maintain that advantage, and that was to trade horses. And so what the AI likes here is to trade the horses, go ahead, recapture the pawn. Um, and, you know, basically now the Fujii doesn't have an attack. It's all defended. Uh, Nishiyama's pieces are now much more active than they were before, right? The bishops are both in hand, so she can drop it at her opponent's camp. Um, so this would have been a good position for Nishiyama. Now, instead, what Nishiyama, I think, was thinking is, well, actually, this horse, I'm going to be able to capture it anyway, right? We talked about it. Once the horse moves to here, you have this knight drop to capture, right? Horse can't run. And so I think what she was thinking was, well, why would I trade horses when I can go ahead and just capture it with my knight later? So what Nishiyama decided to do is to go horse to 3-8. This hits the rook with tempo, blocks all of the escape squares of the horse, and is setting up her knight drop on 5-4. Now, the problem with this is the horse is now on the wrong side of the board, and it's really the only thing it's doing is preventing the horse from retreating. And so what ends up happening is Fujii goes ahead with his attack. And I have these highlighted for a reason. We'll see what that is. And so he's threatening the knight, but you can't run away, right? And so Nishiyama goes ahead, takes the horse. Fujii goes ahead and takes the knight, recaptures with the gold, and then Fujii goes ahead and recaptures the knight. So you see, the reason why I had those pieces highlighted is because what ends up happening in this position essentially is Nishiyama is trading her two knights here and here for this horse on 4-6. And if you think again about what was happening in the game and Fujii's plan to attack on the king side of the board, I mean, this horse is contributing a bit, but not really. It's blocked off by this pawn, and it's going to be blocked off by the pawn for really the foreseeable future. And so Nishiyama is essentially trading two of her knights that are at least contributing to the fight on the king side of the board for one piece, and one piece that wasn't contributing that much to the fight. And while doing that, she essentially took her horse out of that engagement on the king side of the board. And so essentially what happens from here is Fujii just has an overwhelming amount of pieces and an overwhelming attack on the king side of the board. In fact, actually, I forgot to mention this, but when he ran his rook, where did he run his rook to? The king side of the board. And it's also, I mean, it's blocked off by a few pieces for now, but it's potentially going to participate in this attack. So Nishiyama goes ahead, blocks potential pawn drops on 7-4, and Fujii drops a knight on 7-6, and now this is obviously threatening some sort of pawn push and a pawn drop on 8-4. And so Nishiyama decides, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and defend with this silver. And Fujii goes ahead and pushes his pawn on 8-5, coordinating with that knight that he just dropped. And Nishiyama needs to get something going on her end as well. I mean, taking the pawn doesn't do anything. He's just going to drop a pawn. So she goes ahead and drops a bishop, again, trying to get more pieces involved in this fight. And Fujii does the same. He actually just drops a silver here to help him defend. And this is a really funky position. There's so many pieces around Fujii's king here. And even on Nishiyama's side, there's so many pieces just adjacent to each other. I was watching this. It's like a freaking shogi mosh pit or something. Really, really interesting game. I personally don't play games like this really ever, but it just goes to show that there's a lot of different ways to play shogi. And I think even in the commentary, Suzuki Daisuke was saying, this is how you're supposed to play shogi. Especially, I think, after seeing this silver drop on 8-7 move. And so Nishiyama decides to go ahead and play horse to 4-9. This is lining up the bishops to take on 6-7. And again, this horse really was not contributing very much to the game. And so at least have it make a threat. But then what ends up happening is just Fujii trades it off for this horse, which is blocked by a gajillion pieces. And then he also gets tempo by being able to take with pawn on 8-4. Now, actually, in this position, the engine finds a much better move here. And actually, Fujii ends up playing this move, but this is actually an interesting little move order difference that makes actually a pretty big difference. So what the engine wants to do is actually take with the silver first. So in this position, you need to take back with the pawn. And now, when you take on pawn 8-4 and the silver recaptures, the 7-4 square is open for a pawn drop. And this is super strong because if you take with the gold, now there's knight drop on 8-6. If you go back, knight drop on 7-4. And this is just completely winning for Fujii. So I think in this position, you actually can't take the pawn, and you can't run the gold either. So the best try for Nishiyama is to drop her pawn on 8-6. But then obviously you're kind of just losing your gold and just losing the pawn as well. So this would have been a better move order for Fujii. He decides to take the pawn first. Oh, sorry. He decides to take the pawn first, recaptures, and then he takes the silver. And obviously the difference in this position versus the last one is the only way to recapture the silver previously was with the pawn, but now you can actually recapture with the silver. And not only is the pawn drop on 7-4 not possible, now actually Nishiyama gets to threaten a pawn drop on 8-6 because her silver's made it all the way up the board to 7-5. So this would have been this is what actually ended up happening in the game, except Nishiyama did not take with the silver. She made a mistake here and took with the pawn. And so now this is essentially transposed into the previous AI engine line. But actually Fujii misses the pawn drop. It's still a good position for Fujii. And Nishiyama, again, kind of recognizing that she's in a bit of trouble, tries to go for this pawn drop that we saw earlier. But this time it just doesn't quite work. Now, in this position, what the AI wants is to sack the horse for the gold first. I think the main difference is now the pawn drop is a much bigger threat because the gold can't recapture the silver. But this is already just a very bad position for Nishiyama either way. So the game continued. Pawn drop. Fujii takes the pawn with the silver. I think the engine wants a very savage move, knight drop here. And then if pawn takes, gold takes, and this is like a gigantic threat. Yeah. Engine finds all kinds of crazy positions to kind of just ignore your opponent's attack. But okay, so the game continued. Fujii actually took, and Nishiyama drops her silver on 6-9. Now this is actually quite a threat, right? And the threat actually isn't to, I don't think, to take the gold this way. The threat is to take this gold, and if the gold recaptures, now you're able to drop a piece, and you have a rook and a gold. And so actually in this position, commentary was saying this is actually starting to get dicey for Fujii. He's really going to need to find a good attack and potentially also just a good defense in order to win the game. Now he's Fujii. He finds the best move, gold back to 6-8. And what this does obviously is, make sure that this gold doesn't get taken. And then Nishiyama goes ahead and takes the gold. Now here you have to take with the gold. If you take with the king, actually, it is now winning for Nishiyama after rook drop on 4-8. And the main difference between these positions is obviously the position of the king and the gold. In the other position, these are over by one move, and basically because these are over here, the horse actually gets to coordinate with the drop on 6-7. So yeah, Fujii obviously plays it correctly, takes with the gold instead, and then Nishiyama makes. I think at this position Nishiyama already realized that her position was bad. And she's kind of just making moves, hoping, kind of hope moves, I guess, is one way to put it. Not really traps, but just kind of moves to try to find some sort of an attack. instead of trying to defend a position that's not defendable. So it's kind of like almost like a manner thing in professional shogi, I think. But anyway, Fujii finds the absolute best move again, knight drop on 8-5. Again, a very similar knight drop that we saw earlier in different variations. You kind of see even when the move orders are a bit different, or even when the position's a bit different, the same ideas are in a lot of these positions. Nishiyama goes ahead and takes the silver, and actually Fujii has a mate here, and he finds it immediately with knight takes on 7-3. Nishiyama recaptures. And here, the key move, I would say, bishop drop 5-1. Actually, the engine is saying you can even start with gold drop 7-2, and that works. But I think this is definitely an engine way, right? Because it's like clearing everything off, and you have no. So it feels like you have no attack, but apparently you're good to go with knight drop on 8-4. But I think it's just a bit easier from a human perspective to just drop this bishop, because A, you're blocking the retreat path of the king, right, to 6-2, and it even defends this knight on 8-4 through the king. So I think this is definitely the more human move. Nishiyama goes ahead and blocks with the gold, and in this position, Fujii plays silver drop on 7-4. Now again, engine wants gold drop on 7-2. Now it makes more sense because the gold is defended by the knight, and the gold is pinned by the bishop, right? So I think in this position, king's gonna need to run or take, and that is a much more I think findable move. But Fujii instead goes with the silver drop on 7-4. And actually, in this position, Nishiyama resigned. If you take the silver, there's this knight drop. You can't take the pawn because it's guarded by the knight. The knight blocks this escape square. The pawn blocks this escape square. So once this knight gets dropped and there's 3 general pieces, it's a pretty easy mate to find here. And so that was Fujii's idea. So yeah, that was a very exciting game, very interesting game as well. Not a type of game that you see that often, or certainly that I play ever, where we saw Fujii's idea really from the very beginning of the game was, I'm just going to ignore the rook side completely. I'm going to put all my pieces towards the king side and even attack from the king side and just try and win with overwhelming numbers. And Nishiyama was fighting essentially all game, trying to activate her pieces back towards the king side. And Fujii just did a really good job preventing that. And not only preventing it, but continuously just adding pieces to the king side, which, again, like it was like a heavy attack in a way. I mean, you saw at some point he had like 3 pieces blocking his rook, but he ended up getting to trade it off for the horse, and then those pieces really got going. And yeah, at some point he had all of the knights, and they were all lined up on top of the king. So yeah, a very fun game. Nishiyama had her chance with that one move where she could have traded the horses off. Would have been great to see her take down Fujii. If she would have won this game, she'd really be on a roll, and I think you could be really, really confident she's going to end up passing her pro exam if she was able to beat Fujii. Now, luckily for her, she didn't need to play against Fujii in order to qualify for the entrance match. And actually, her winning the first round game in the NHK tournament to end up matching against Fujii, that did count towards qualifying for the pro exam. So yeah, more to come, hopefully, with Nishiyama games. I think, again, her next pro exam match isn't until October, so we got a couple weeks to wait for the next super exciting game there. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.